Harry's Wife, Part 75.8. Video Analysis. Keen as always to ensure that you receive the best education and information about narcissism, I have analysed and set of further video clips so that you can see Harry's wife in action. There's a diverse range which shows different responses in different occasions, and also showing the reaction of other individuals to Harry's wife. I'm pleased to see in the many comments that you've been making how accessible and insightful you've been finding this aspect of my work. Naturally, I explain to you in terms that you're easily able to understand the way that my kind function and operate. And it's clear that the added examples provided by Harry's wife are giving you even greater clarification. Not only are you enjoying the fact that you are now able to understand precisely why she behaves as she does and what's really going on, it also enables you to then link that to the narcissism that you've experienced in your own private lives, so that you can understand, so that's what a response to wounding is, and okay, that's a challenge, and this is where a facade drops and then comes back again, and the various responses to a threat to control, etc. This is the place where you will find all the answers about narcissism. Now, I know there are some of you listening who are just really here to see me giving it to Harry's wife, in a sense. Fair enough. But I would also encourage those of you listening that have perhaps just come here to see the dissection of Harry's wife's behaviour to access my other videos as well. Not only will it enable you to understand more about her, because I cover so many different aspects of the narcissistic dynamic, it will assist you if you happen to be involved with a narcissist in some form, or it will help you in terms of spotting one should one of our kind target you in the future. This information is platinum graded. You're not going to find it anywhere else. You're not going to find the level of insight, depth, and analysis performed by anybody other than me. I know myself and my kind, and you, inside out. Use this information in the videos, not only those about Harry's wife, but the hundreds of other videos that I have provided. Often I see in the comments people asking, have you done something about this? Do search my playlists. Do search my videos generally on my channel, and you'll invariably find something. If after searching you can't find it, drop me an email, narcissist1909@gmail.com, and I'll endeavour to assist you further. Remember, if you're looking for bespoke advice about your own situation, that's what the consultations are for. Use them. Many people do, and realise just how invaluable they are. Now, time to embrace the clips. Our first video clip is the somewhat infamous Guinness clip. A number of viewers have asked me to analyse this and have sent me the clip. Thank you for doing so. The original footage is about 1.5 minutes in length, and we don't need to look at all of that. We have the key component of it coming up. The footage concerns a pint off. Harry's wife is at the Guinness Academy and is being interviewed by an Irish broadcaster for a news station or television programme in Ireland, and she has been invited to take part in a pint off. And therefore, the interviewer challenges Harry's wife to pour the perfect pint of Guinness, stating that she feels pretty confident that she'll be able to beat Harry's wife. And the clip that is provided shows it in both normal time and then slowed down and slowed down and slowed down. And I put it in a loop so you can see it as it transpires. So at the start, the interviewer says, "I'm going to challenge you." And as she says, "challenge you," notice the countenance of Harry's wife alter. You see it more distinctly in the slowed down clips as the jaw comes forward, the look in the eyes changes, and her left hand forms the claw, which is often seen. That response is that to challenge. Of course, because the interviewer is talking to her, she's providing her with fuel. Her words, the look on her face, the look in her eyes, her body gesture, all of those things are giving Harry's wife fuel. So that isn't a problem. But as soon as she says the word challenge, notice the change that occurs. It is distinct. All of a sudden, the jaw comes forward, and as for a moment, a hate-filled look forms in the eyes, and the hand grips into this talon-like claw. What you're seeing there is the response to the challenge fuel. The fuel isn't a problem, but the issuing of a challenge is. As you know, when we are conscious, we must always have control. And therefore saying, I'm going to challenge you, is quite obviously a challenge to the narcissist. And for that microsecond, the facade slips. The veneer of being decent and friendly and happy and personable vanishes. And we see what lurks beneath coming to the fore. It can't be controlled perfectly. And we get a brilliant glimpse of the way that the jaw comes forward, the eyes suddenly become filled with hatred, and the hand clenches into this claw. And it's only there for a moment. It's the briefest of instances. It's certainly noticeable, and when you know what to look for, all the more so. But at first, you could quite possibly miss it. And indeed, I suspect the interviewer does, because she looks away from Harry's wife as she says this, and then turns back to her. In that instance, the narcissism can't keep the facade in place. It's not able to do so. And what happens is it ends up showing what's underneath: the ignited fury. The desire to leap forward and put her hands around the neck of the interviewer and squeeze, 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 until her eyes bulge and her tongue flops from her mouth. Of course, that can't be done. And there can't be that direct assertion of control in a malign way. We see what lurks beneath, and then in an instant, boom, the facade is back. And it's a smile and a slight nod and a little laugh as the narcissism reinstates that facade almost immediately. There's a look of surprise, the eyebrows go up, and a smile as the facade comes back. And in that instance, because the interviewer is responding to the reaction, because Harry's wife's response is a direct assertion of control over the interviewer. And what she does is she raises her eyebrows as if to say, oh, you think you can beat me, can you? And there's a friendly affirmative response from the interviewer, but that signals control because it's in agreement to what Harry's wife is doing. So the threat to control vanishes as quickly as it arrives. But what we see, challenge issued, response by way of ignited fury, which is then quickly held in place by the reappearance of the facade as a consequence of the response, both in terms of the giving of control and fuel from the interviewer. The look on Harry's wife's face is quite remarkable in terms of the shift that takes place from the smile to the hate-filled gaze, the jutting of the jaw, the gripping of the hand, and then it vanishes just as quickly. That shows how quickly the narcissism operates. And here, in an unaware narcissist that operates through instinct, but the narcissism hasn't perfected its role, as we've seen many occasions. Here, it manages to recover the position pretty quickly indeed, and that's because the interviewer indicates that she's come under control again by her reactions thereafter. However, in other instances, as you've listened into my other videos, sometimes the facade slips for longer, or we see the repeated response to the threats to control. But here, there's a microsecond response that occurs, and it is a brilliant example of both the speed at which the facade can vanish and reappear again as a consequence of a threat to control. Our second piece of footage is a short piece of footage when baby Archie makes an appearance. And we see the Duke of Sussex holding his son, all wrapped up in a little bundle, a little hat on there. Glass close to his chest, and Harry's wife stood to one side. And they're clearly being photographed. Harry looking ahead, proud father, and Harry's wife, what do I need to do here? Not quite sure. And her inability to naturally know what to do, but rather having to be guided by her narcissism, shows once again here. Remember, when I talk about an individual being guided by their narcissism, I am not suggesting that the individual should not be held to account for their behaviours. What I'm doing is I'm explaining that the individual is being led by instinct. For instance, if I were to come near you and poke a sharp stick towards your eye, you would not do this. Oh look, HG's poking a sharp stick towards my eye. That could injure me. I better knock the stick away, jerk my head back to avoid injury. You would naturally just brush the stick away, or move your head back, or both. You do it instinctively. As you're listening to me now, if you heard a loud bang, you'd instinctively jump. You perhaps get down on the floor, curl up in a ball. What you wouldn't do is stand there and think, oh, there's a loud bang. Has a bomb gone off? Well, if a bomb has gone off, some shrapnel might be flying through the air. I suppose I'd better make myself small to avoid the risk of injury. Why? Because thinking about it would be too slow, and you're already shredded by the shrapnel. Instead, you instinctively respond. And that's what the narcissism does. It's an instinctive response for the lesser and mid-range narcissist, because they lack the evolved nature of the greater and the ultra to respond in a way which is already established through thought and calculation, because our minds move so much faster. The difficulty, of course, for lesser and mid-range narcissists, and you should listen to my video, The Imitation Game, to understand more about this, is that they will glitch. In some instances, no reaction is provided whatsoever, usually seen with the lesser, sometimes with mid-range. Basically, it's a 404 moment. It doesn't compute. The narcissism isn't able to provide a response for the narcissist, and therefore you get a blank luck. Sometimes the glitch is an incongruous reaction to circumstances, and we've seen that often with Harry's wife, where her response is one which doesn't really match what's going on around her. For instance, grinning inanely in circumstances where everybody else looks rather solemn. In other instances, it demonstrates itself as an awkwardness, not quite sure where to fit in, where to stand, what to say, what to do. And that's because the responses aren't natural. They're being generated by her narcissism. And because her narcissism hasn't achieved that evolved status of a greater or ultra, there are occasions where it shows with this awkwardness, a delayed response, an inappropriate response, and so forth. And it's important to be able to see that in action. Also understand, when I talk about evolve, I don't mean that she is going to evolve into a greater or an ultra. The evolution of the narcissist occurs during formation, i.e. when we are children between the ages of 0 and 9. And that's when we become the greater, or the lesser, or the mid-range. We evolve into the narcissist and a particular sub-school. Once the narcissist has evolved into that sub-school, that's it. We don't change further. A mid-ranger doesn't become a greater, a lesser doesn't become a mid-ranger, and so forth. It's a fixed status, but the evolution takes place during those formative years of roughly 0 to 9. So returning to our video clip, bearing in mind what I've explained about the glitching that goes on, as I explained, we see that Prince Harry is looking rather proud, and Harry's wife stood next to him, and she's not entirely sure what to do, and therefore that amounts to a threat to control, and it exhibits, of course, with the usual brushing of the hair to one side, the jiggling on the spot as if she needs to go to the bathroom, putting the hands together, no, that doesn't work, together, no, I'll pull them away, oh yes, there's a baby, I suppose I better look at him. So as you can see from this clip, Harry, he stood there, positions himself, smiling for the camera. He remains reasonably motionless. But his wife, not at all. First she looks at him, then she brushes the hair, then she brings the hands together, takes them apart, looks at the camera, and then remembers, oh yes, there's a baby here, I suppose I better take an interest in him. That is an excellent example of the absence of her emotional empathy. She looks at the camera because it's about her, and then her narcissism reminds her, for the purposes of the implementation of the facade, you better look at your son, because that will look good for the cameras. Somebody with emotional empathy would invariably have got themselves in a position which was far more natural, probably be holding the baby themselves, although, of course, father can do also, but would be looking tenderly at the child and wouldn't be jiggling about as if they needed to run to the bathroom. And her response and behaviours exhibit an absence of emotional empathy, the glitching of her narcissism as it struggles to find the suitable pose for which she should stand, and that awkwardness manifests. There isn't any threat to control going on here. It's quite simply in this moment, as her narcissism decides what aspects of the facade to show, it doesn't do it particularly well. And so we see this jiggling about on the spot, the moving of the hair, the bringing the hands together, then taking them apart, and then finally the narcissism goes, got it. Look at the baby. So in the few seconds beforehand, the narcissism is trying to work out, because it's not a natural response, because it's not founded on emotional empathy, what should we cause our narcissist to do here? How should she stand? How should she look? And as it struggles to achieve this, it's like an out-of-control robot. And you can see that with her responses and behaviours, as mentioned. The jigging about on the spot. There is the usual smug smile, the brushing of the hair, not sure what I should be doing, so default action, brush the hair, bring my hands together, no, that won't work, bring them apart again, shall I stand this way, shall I stand that way, I'm looking at the camera, and then the narcissism says, found it. It's like, as I explained in the imitation game, the narcissism has gone off into the warehouse, trying to find the appropriate stance that she should adopt. And of course, in this instant, it takes too long to do it. It struggles. It's like, for instance, you are arriving at the border and you need to find your passport. And you're scrambling around in the bottom of your bag looking for it, and then eventually, aha, here it is. Prior to that, you might be muttering, feeling a bit warm as you're under the scrutiny of the relevant border force or immigration officers. And then you finally find your passport and display it. It's similar here. Her narcissism is scrambling around, trying to work out what it should do, and eventually it gets there. But already we have seen once again the operation of her narcissism at work. In our third clip, Harry and his wife, she makes an appearance shortly after the gentleman in white sits down, it's time to go to the ball game. And therefore he's decided to take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. I think the last baseball game I went to was Tampa Bay Rays against Houston Astros. Go Rays. Anyway, leaving that to one side, what's going on in this clip? Well, we see that there's a gentleman in white clapping enthusiastically, Harry looking around, and then we see Harry's wife, and she's saying something. Notice that she's not actually engaging with anybody. She starts to talk, and then she leans forward to speak to Harry, who hasn't heard her at all because he's talking to the person on his right, possibly saying, listen, pal, after the game, do you happen to have a sky blue felt tip pen? Rather worryingly, I left the top off mine yesterday, and I've still got to finish the sky picture. Don't suppose you've got one, have you? Or maybe he's wondering if he can borrow a different colour and perhaps change it to a sunset. Who knows? Anyway, he's talking away, and of course, Harry's wife doesn't get any response. That failure on Harry's part will wound her, because he's not given a reaction and he's not provided any fuel. Now, as you'll see, when she comes into view, there's a smile, but it's that fixed look as usual, the fixed grin, and then leaning in to talk to Harry, to say something. He's not listening. She's wounded. And we see very briefly a downcast look. The grin just about holds. But as she looks away, the teeth have disappeared, to replace by that dark, soulless look in the eyes before the grin starts to make a reappearance once again. And as we can see in a rerun of it that's slowed down, leaning in, speaking, no response, wounding, grin starts to fade, thoughts of darkness start to make an appearance, and then she looks back. What's happening here? Well, as I've just explained to you, she's wounded. Harry's lack of response provides no fuel and wounds her, makes her feel unimportant, makes her feel as if she doesn't exist, vulnerable. And in the instance, her narcissism has to then assert control over Harry. She could have given him a nudge to cause him to speak, but her narcissism didn't select that. It might be that it perceived that he wouldn't respond even to a dig in the ribs, and therefore she doesn't go down that route. The indirect route isn't available to her. She isn't able to turn to anybody else and say, "Look at Ginger Nuts here, ignoring me. What a twat." Presumably because the narcissism doesn't have a member of the coterie on hand that might well agree with her and perceives too great a risk in trying to speak to somebody else in unfavourable terms about him. Therefore, indirect isn't available. Once again, she's shunted into the assertion of control and withdrawal, which means that she has those dark thoughts of, who do you think you are ignoring me? And therefore, Harry will become painted black. As a consequence of this wounding, her fuel levels start to drop. And that's why we see the dark, soulless luck appear as the fury starts to form. Now, we're not treated to the remainder of the clip as to what actually happened next. All we see is the wounding in action and the response to it, which shows the grin fading and the darkened luck making its appearance. Of course, this is the response, as you know, to wounding. Harry becomes painted black, and he will have been devalued at a later juncture because, in essence, the narcissism will have looked to have got him back, so to speak. Control has been obtained. This has been done by remaining in a position of withdrawal and basically thinking, "You ignorant bastard for not listening to me," or, "All right, I'll tell somebody else what I've got to say," or, "You never listen to me, I'm sick and tired of it." And that, in her own mind, along with the ignited fury, is both the thought and the feeling, which will enable her, in the unconscious, to feel a sense of control. So the threat to control is dealt with. The plummeting fuel levels will no doubt be dealt with also, because she'll have obtained fuel from somebody else around her. She is in a group. The problem that she has is that she will need, ultimately, driven by her narcissism, to punish Harry. Now, she doesn't sit and think to herself, "I'll get you later, you ginger bugger." No, not at all. What happens is the narcissism does it for her, and at a later juncture, she will carry out some form of devaluing act. So maybe it's the case that evening, Harry doesn't get any spicy poontang action. Or, when they get back, she says, "Thanks for ignoring me all afternoon." Exaggeration, because he wasn't. He then has to plead his case. He then goes, I wasn't, gives her fuel, shows he's under control, and he's suitably punished for the earlier transgression. The narcissism moves on. She does not actively think, I know, I am now going to punish you because you didn't respond to me at the baseball or polo match or whatever it is they happen to be at. And instead, the narcissism does it for her. It causes her to respond in a particular way by staying in withdrawal, to gain that control, to feel a particular way through the ignited fury, to think a particular way about Harry, and then, driven by her narcissism, she will in effect punish him later, but she doesn't realise that's what she's doing. Her narcissism just causes her to believe it's justified as a consequence of some earlier behaviour which isn't suitable. Only the greater and ultra would make a conscious mental note to get somebody at a later juncture. And there we have further analysis of another clip demonstrating the narcissism in action and what's going on below.